So, well, I'd love to say welcome to everybody for joining us on the call today. This is Livestock Publication Council's Coffee and Collaboration, and we are so excited that you guys can be here with us. We love this opportunity every month to bring our members together and learn from each other, learn from others outside of our industry at times, but basically just hopefully provide you with a little nugget of information that can help you do your job better. And maybe also create more understanding of all the different jobs that we're doing within our industry. I think the look of an ag communicator today is quite varied and different across platforms. And so I always enjoy the opportunity to learn about areas maybe I'm not as engaged in. But today is definitely one that I am going to be taking notes because this is something I'm mired in every day. So we're going to be talking about editing today and how we can be better editors of our own writing, but also how we can be better editors of our peers' writing and so forth too. So I'm super excited. But before we get into that, I wanted to first off allow Stacy Fox, who is our Executive Director of LPC, to share a few quick announcements with you guys.
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. You're going to get a contest update at the end of this, but our awards contest has opened up. And so be sure to get your entries in. And Macy Hurst is one of our co-chairs for that committee and is going to give us a great update at the end of the call. But please think about what you're going to enter, and you can save money by entering early. The Ag Media Summit registration is going to open next Thursday. So April 2nd, Ag Media registration opens up. So we're excited about that. We also are going to do our gifts and giving auction again this year to help raise money for LPC. We will do that in May. And so be on the lookout for that. But if in the meantime you have any items that you think might be a good fit for that you'd be willing to donate, whether it's art or stays or services or anything like that, we would sure love to have any of those. And so I'll put a link down in the chat where you can sign up to maybe make a donation to help out LPC. This helps our programming throughout the year. It helps with all of our activities and keeping those membership dues as low as possible while delivering on as much value as we can. So we would sure love it if you are able to donate. And then when the auction comes around, share it with all of your contacts, and hopefully there will be something in there that you are interested in bidding on. So that is all that I have right now. I appreciate the time and looking forward to this session.
Thank you, Stacy. Well, I love this topic too. It kind of feels like a little bit of a trip down memory lane because some of my early writing was very much edited by one of our speakers today, Shauna Hermel. One of my favorite experiences of my life was being an intern at the Angus Journal, and Shauna and Angie Denton both, it took two of them to oversee me that summer. And I don't know, I just remember like how much I really valued the editing and the time that they spent on my work. I hope that's something. I feel like sometimes it's a little hard with this younger generation where maybe they don't have that, like it's more insulting to them to be edited. I don't know if you work with anybody who feels insulted when they edit, when you edit their stuff. And so I thought, gosh, maybe we should just talk about editing a little bit and how we can maybe not only do a better job of editing ourselves, but also maybe just talk about different ways that we approach editing other people's work, because I think there's so much value in it, and it really does help us all really put out the best work possible, because I think we all can benefit from somebody else's perspective in some way or another. So today I would like to welcome two gurus from Angus who are going to be sharing a little bit about how they approach editing. But before they get started, I'd love to have Shauna Hermel and Julie Mais. Would you guys please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today? I don't care. I'll let you guys fight over who goes first.
Julie, you can go first.
I didn't speak fast enough. Hi, Julie Mais. I've been with the Angus Journal for going on 7 years now. I am a student. I was a graduate of K-State in Ag Communications and Animal Science. Was a member of the Agriculturalist team there and got to be editor of that publication, and that really sparked my love for print and putting the whole publication together from writing, editing to layout. Spent some time at the Ohio Cattlemen's Association as an editor and communications director, and then on to the Hereford World, where I was editor there prior to joining Angus. And so basically, I've spent my entire working career in print publications. And of course, as we all know, it's not just print anymore. It is all media that a lot of us are tasked with getting the information out to. I work primarily out of my home office in Manhattan, Kansas, and have a young family here. So really am thankful for this opportunity to speak with you all. And I see some of my my current mentors, former bosses on this call. So I've learned a lot from them, and I know I still have a lot to learn as well.
Well, I'm Shauna Hermel, and I guess I got my love for editing at the University of Missouri with Don Ranley's magazine editing classes. He was exceptional and really drove home. It was a weed out class, but he really drove home the importance of how sentence structure, how word use affects reader comprehension and even their desire to get through a story, which has one of the things he said is that if you make it through our classes and if you excel in editing, you'll be looked to no matter where you go or what field to study or what career you take on, people will look to you to help make their information better. And so that launched me. I went to Wisconsin and got a master's degree and then went up to Minneapolis for about 8 years and worked for National Hog Farmer and Beef. Worked for two very diverse editors while I was there with Paul Andre and oh boy, Bill Pullen. But they had two very distinct styles because they had two very distinct audiences. And so I started developing a style sheet there so that I could keep those different, where one would write out hundredweight all the time, the other would use the CWT period. And so it was just a matter of trying to keep those distinctions. It grew. And when I left there and came to Angus, we kind of started on the same path. So been at Angus now almost 28 years. So it continues to evolve and grow. I hate to say how many pages our style book is, but it's become hopefully something that the journal team, the Bulletin team, even our Angus Communications and Certified Angus Beef have access to it now through Teams. So being able to do some fun things there and hopefully make our publications more enjoyable, more understandable to our readers.
How many words do you think you have edited, Shauna, in your career? Why didn't you keep track of that?
It will make my hair too gray, okay? I'm trying to keep a little brown still.
Okay, fair. We won't go there. We won't go there. Well, I'd like to start off by asking you guys. So we're going to approach this. We do all these a little different, but we're just going to approach this as a bit of a Q&A today, where we've got some questions that we're going to walk through together. But I encourage you guys, if you have questions, don't hesitate to throw those into the chat, and also make sure you take a second or two to introduce yourself and kind of peruse who's on the call. We want this to be an opportunity for you to get to know who some of the other members are of our organization and just people who share common passions as you. So let's get started with how can we be better editors of our own writing? How do we start with ourselves first when it comes to editing?
One of the things I think that it comes down to is giving ourselves time to do the writing. Actually, even goes back to give yourself time to do the interviews that you need to build that base for a good story, and being able to not just try and get through the moment, but to actually listen, to take in, how that person speaks, how their mannerisms, what's important to them. Most stories will have two or three, if not more, sources, and be able to digest that information, and then sit down and write it. Enjoy the writing process and enjoy going back. Don't just write it and send it off. To the editor, but take the time to go back and look at it and reflect on it a little bit. Did it make the points that you wanted to make? Julie, I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think as editors, a lot of times we maybe don't give ourselves enough time if we're the ones writing the story. Um, so definitely give yourself enough time to get that writing done, but then also to go through the editing process. If I do that for myself, I do like to maybe read it over again after I've gotten a story written, and then let it sit. Maybe if I can give it a day, look at it again tomorrow with fresh eyes, I find that I maybe am catching things that, my tired writing brain wouldn't have caught, or being a little too close to some of those uh, paragraphs, sentences, and things like that. And another thing I like to do either immediately or after I do it a couple of times is just reading it out loud. That's a tip I picked up from one of the AMS sessions. I think back when I was a student, and I thought that that's what I continue to do. Um, Actually, I had finished my column last month, and I was reading it back to myself before I sent it on. And my husband was in the other room, and he was like, "Who are you talking to?" And I was like, "I was just reading my story out loud." So yeah, I do that, and what I look for there is, does it sound conversational, pending on the type of piece that you're writing? Am I um tripping over any sentences? Am I finding run on sentences? Are those transitions there? And really also like the pacing, does it kind of flow as you're reading it out loud? So those are some of the things I'm looking for.
Of course, one of the things that we try to make sure, to look at the audience and try and make sure, are we using the words that our audience would use? Would they understand it? And it's fun to kind of insert some new words or some new, we're educational, so we're also trying to train our audiences, but to make sure that we don't throw one of those new words in with no reference point. It's and a lot of times if we have somebody who's real quotable, sometimes we need to figure out a way to word in a explanation of what exactly he meant or she meant, to make it totally comprehensive.
Mhm. And I think like if you're writing, especially like for another publication, in addition to the audience, just knowing that style can help you as you go through um, that story, and as an editor who works with freelance writers, I do appreciate when they can write to our style. Like those little things really do uh, save us time, and
Yeah.
gets me excited to continue to work with that
We
writer.
love people who make it easy for us. One thing I think too to help add to the story, part of the story is a headline and deck. Part of the story is the cut lines. There's always those extra bits of information, that don't fit in the story, but could really add to a cut line and could help add interest to the story and make the people personable. Um, it's amazing how many stories come in that don't have those details, and you can improve your writing by also making sure that you have those, attached, because they help explain the story and they help as you're going through and editing your own story, it helps you make sure that you are on track.
Mhm. Um, and I guess this is part of my like how I learned about proofreading and editing. I did want to mention kind of that process and experience for me really started back when I was at K-State. I was working for the Department of Communications and helping put together these extension publications. So as a student worker, I worked with my boss. I would proofread a publication and mark it up, old school pen and paper, which we don't really do that much now, but and I would walk it over to him and we would go over it together. And I really learned a lot that way. So when I'm thinking about um becoming a better editors of our own writing and being able to also share that with others, just working with a mentor or somebody who you think you can learn something from, getting feedback on your proofreading and editing. I've gotten feedback on writing, but that really stands out in my mind of um, being mentored on the actual editing and proofreading process.
Anybody else have tips?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
I do like your point on um, that mentoring over the editing part of it, because I do think that that's where Shauna, that was very helpful to me. And I know, thinking about younger writers, it can be challenging at times. And I feel like this era of digital is great because it's kind of easy to mark it up quicker. But to that point, you're not sitting down. Like I remember sitting in your office, Shauna, moved a few piles of magazines out of the way and
Magazines.
sat down there with you. Sorry, just kidding. And being able to like have you talk me through it was super helpful. And I feel like that's the hard thing when we're all working remote, and so I'm always asking like, can you please like leave your edits in when you can of my colleagues, because I learn from looking at what the edits are, because that helps me recognize, ooh, I'm getting that heavy again, or I just hurried too much and I missed this, or just things like that. I feel like there is value of keeping those track changes in so we can kind of learn, even if it's not sitting down across the table from each other.
Yep.
Um, so let's move on a little bit, just in light of time. What should our approach be when we're editing the work of other people? Thoughts on that? Because that is always, that's an important part of what a lot of us do, but it can also be tricky at times. So how do you guys approach it?
We have had some wonderful writers that each one, I mean, Jennifer, Angie, Steve, Miranda, there's so many writers that we have had that add to Troy Smith, Becky Mills. Not everyone is attracted to each writer, but our good fortune was that we've had the pages to be able to share those voices and attract a larger audience. I guess when I approach a story, and this has probably changed some over the years, I would have been a lot more exacting to Angus Journal, Angus Beef Bulletin, but to let the writer's voice stay connected, and that would be there might be some phrases that don't actually that's not the way that Shauna would say them, or that's not the way that Shauna would write them, but they're good, they're grammatically correct. We want people to identify, we've had some columnists, from John Crouch to Dick Spader to Troy Marshall and Paul Dykstra and Johnette, and you want that when the reader is reading that story, you want them to hear their voice because that gives credibility, right? And that's one of the things that as we edit, we need to add. There might be some words that I wouldn't use that one of our columnists might, and I think it's important for us to keep it grammatically correct. We want to keep it uniform to our style, and then of course you've got to go for length, but that might be editing it one length to go in the magazine versus another length that we can put online and give somebody a little bit more explanation. So I guess keep the writer's voice, make it correct, but stay within the consistency of the magazine, but don't overpower what the writer contributes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think back to some of the columns that we included in the Angus Journal, and some of them can get pretty technical to where I'm not the expert in our genetic evaluation, or AGI and things like that. So if they happen to send us in a story, or excuse me, a column that is, you know, a couple paragraphs too long, we have those deadlines set early enough that the hope is we can work with those authors to cut out or condense that story, kind of based on what their expertise says. So, if there were a few sentences we needed to cut, a lot of times we'll take the liberty to do that and see where we can tighten things up. But for the sake of, like what Shauna was saying, make sure we have their voice and um, the content in there that needs to be, according to them. We do try to work with them to get that word count where we need it to be, specifically for print. And then I think, as I've gotten to know other editors and my peers, and we've had conversations about this topic, there are always those things that like stand out to us. Maybe we learned it back in college as we were learning about this process, that like really stand out, like the word impact. So like if I'm reading an article, like those are the things that are like, well, I'm for sure probably going to be taking out impact and reworking that sentence. Ending a sentence with a preposition that stands out like a sore thumb. So there are those things that like I just like look for and can pretty quickly change and edit for kind of our style and my preferences and things like that. But I also know that a lot of you have your own pet peeves when it comes to things and stories. And another thing I look at too is where could we maybe paraphrase some quotes. I think those are some, as I'm working especially with younger writers, um, I think an example would be if a source just tells us like historical facts about their operation. That might be something where we could take that out of their quote and just put it in a paraphrase and leave that space for his description of his grandpa who started the ranch, you know. Um, so I think that's another thing that kind of stands out to me that I'm looking for, and especially, like I said, some of those younger writers as we're working on developing them.
A lot of times that's an instance where they didn't ask enough questions and don't feel
Um,
comfortable paraphrasing it, right? And maybe we need to have another question.
Anything else, guys? You good? Okay. I think very valuable stuff for sure. I love it. It's always just fun. Like I'm jotting down notes. So forgive me. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be asking questions. And I'm like, I have like 40 sticky notes. I should just get a notebook out. Because I was just thinking about those things that you look for. It's funny. I know that like one of the gals who used to work for us, I knew that if I sent something to her, she would wipe out any that I had, even though I don't think I'm that, but she really hates that. So I would go through and be like, I don't want her to find any that's that she's going to take out. But then someone else would read it and they would never pick up on it at all. So it's funny and interesting. And I think that's the value of just remembering it's somebody's suggestions and thoughts, but ultimately there's a style that we're shooting for. And to Julie's point, there are things that are also right and wrong as well. But what a process it is. So what resources do you guys use when you're editing? Lisa Mosier had asked in the chat, how much do you rely on AI tools? So I kind of feel like that all fits into this. So what are you using and how are you using AI if you are at all?
Do you want to take the lead on this, Julie?
Sure. Kind of specific to AI, Sean and I had a kind of I thought, an interesting discussion on this topic as we were kind of preparing for this. And AI has been a topic at Angus as well over the last few years of how we can use it, are going to use it. And that's not just writing, it's in photography and design and beyond that. But one aspect of AI that I rely heavily on is spell check and
Mm-hmm.
grammar. And Shauna made that point. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That is AI for us. And so I have that turned on in my Word document as I'm writing. I have that turned on in InDesign and InCopy to help flag any of that as I'm going through. And Yeah, so I definitely use that, and I look at those suggestions when it comes to grammar as well. I don't always take it, um, when Word suggests a grammar change, but, that is just something I definitely use. But beyond that, I haven't really gotten into how to use that in the editing process. Sean, I didn't know if you had anything else to add to that, and I would love to know anybody else's suggestions as well.
I think I use it a lot the same as you do as far as looking for those blue underlines and those red underlines to, to look for the words. You can't, and I would turn off an auto function as far as doing the auto changes because a lot of times Word can change things incorrectly. So it will automatically change cowherd to one word and it's two unless you're talking about a person. We'll get that drummed into everybody. But also, take the opportunity to look at, there, should it be EIR, should it be ERE? And Rev is another AI tool that we use. But if we take it verbatim on the AI side of it for a quote, we really need to, if it's an important quote, go back and listen to it and make sure that what's bowls isn't really supposed to be bulls, or if there's other things that Rev just doesn't have the agricultural language down, to make sure that you get the information correct. And I know we're supposed to try and keep those quotes as accurate as possible to what they say. Using that AI version is not necessarily going to get you that. So um, also in Word too, there is, if you go up under tools and you pull down, it has a section with spelling and grammar that can get you beyond. It will take you to those individual things that for grammar to correct. It'll take you to the questions on there and there to make sure that you have the right one. But it'll also help give some questions as to, is this as concise as it could be, with some options on some word use. Um, and I think that is great. There's also a tool that you can get a Fleshman Kincaid reading score. Um, it's interesting to go through and analyze that to see what your writing level is, and we all should be using various writing levels. If we're writing a column that's going out focused toward juniors and maybe scholarship applications, that needs to be written at a different level than a veterinary description of what avian influenza is or what Clostridium perfringens is. There's different levels of writing that we need to use, and it can help just give you an example of where you're writing what this story is, and I think that can be helpful. Other things that we use as far as tools, we use our Angus style book. Pick a dictionary because not all dictionaries are the same. Pick a priority. Are you going to go with AP style for when you put a hyphen in words with pre and things like that? Um, we use like the Merck Vet Manual as our source and the compendium of veterinary products for our disease and product names. Um, so it's important to pick some of those things that are important to your audience so that you have a reference and can stay consistent, because we don't like to drive our artists crazy going back and forth on things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a note on that style guide. I feel really lucky that I got to inherit and come in and use the Angus style guide because it is extensive and it's even beyond just our style. It's historical references and things like that, so we can go back and make sure that anything historically that we're including is accurate. So I really do appreciate that, and Heather on our team does a great job of keeping that updated, so that's current and it's being looked at weekly probably.
Everybody needs a Heather.
Yeah, that's another note we have. Everyone needs a Heather. She's an excellent proofreader, and truly, like, that makes our publication the
Yeah.
best it could be, I think. Um speaking of that, I think peers are a great resource as well. We've got a chat going on at Angus of like if we have a question or want to discuss something that like this, I'm having trouble with this sentence. Can you guys help me? Or what would you do on the style for this? Or if we run into like a new terminology that we haven't used before, how do we want to handle this? And we can work on it together. So I would say peers are a valuable resource as well.
So speaking of your peers,
Mhm.
how do you guys deliver edits in a what's the right word? In a way that is accepted well by your peers? Because, I do think that sometimes people, like I mentioned earlier, struggle to take that feedback um, at times. So, what are some of the tricks and tips that you've learned over the years to deliver that in a way that's very meaningful and affects change?
Julie, you can
Great
start this
question.
one.
Um, I guess I also think about when I think about this question, there's different levels of writers that we have the opportunity to work with, everywhere from like interns who are just getting started to um, those have been in the industry, for decades. And so their writing styles and levels are different. But maybe speaking to interns or younger writers, um, I think having the opportunity to sit down with them, as kind of discussed earlier, is one of I think the better approaches because you can help explain any changes. It gives them opportunity to ask questions, and some editing is subjective. So I always look forward to like some discourse on is this change good or not, and yeah, and getting to make the decision that way. But as I think about giving those back, there are some things that just have to be changed for style. But as I'm like reading for flow or organization, I try to ask questions, like could you explain more on this topic, or this didn't quite make sense to me. If I'm reading it and I'm like, I want to know more about this, there's a good chance another reader might want to know more too. So I try to give them the opportunity to go back and rewrite themselves as a learning chance versus just going in and making the changes according to what I would have done. And I think that working together, hopefully they're learning and we come up with a story that is meets our goal. Um, when working with those younger writers as well, this is something that we just started using for our interns that actually we got the idea from Lisa Mosier when I met with her, I think last year or the year before, about starting with like a worksheet, um, basically filling out a form before you even start to go do the story. And I think that really helps set our writers up for getting the information that they need out of the interview, making sure our goals are aligning and that we're on the same page as they go to work on that story. So that really kind of helps us us up on the front end as we have those editing conversations later.
And I'll Julie works with a lot more interns now than what I do on the bulletin side of it. So I'm a couple years away from that part of mentoring. Um, but talking through kind of how internally we can go through and kind of put it back on the writer a little bit to see what is edited. We have an in-copy InDesign workflow, so and in-house as stories go through a pre-layout proofing process, and then they go through a layout proofing process as well. The files that have the final tracked version, which would have multiple editors on them, are saved into a folder and for review. Part of that is so that we can go back and have the writer look at the changes that were made and kind of do a self-development. But then also, so if we have any question down the end, if we have a source come back to us, doesn't happen very often, but we know how something got changed and when and where. If we have a writer who wants to know, well, why did something get cut? It might have been for length or something like that. Then we can kind of document that. So we kind of count on our internal people to go back through that process and look at those track changes as they can. It's a little bit harder with external people because things come in Word and depending on what story it is, Lindsay may put it into the system, put it into InCopy InDesign, or I might. If it's a story from a freelancer, it'll be going through me, and I can send them an initial edit that I do before I pull it into InCopy InDesign. And if that's a new writer for us, I'll usually try and do that. But then count on them as well. There's always that function of pulling it out into a Word file at the very end and doing a compare documents to the original to see what all got changed along the way. And so that's hopefully by talking to the writer beforehand to make sure that we have the objective of the story clear. If we know who the sources are going to be and we're not going to turn somebody loose on a story we don't think that they're quite capable of grabbing, we'll as long as the story objective is met and we get it in time to do the corrections, we'll definitely try to work with the writer if there's any of those small changes. Again, if it's something that just comes in off objective or then we'll have to talk that through with the writer and say, okay, this is something that we're just going to have to, we need to add this perspective, or we need a red Angus, or we don't need a red Angus breeder, we need a black Angus breeder, things like that we look for to double check and make sure that they fit our audience.
Yeah,
So,
I'll just
go
add.
ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just we on the journal side we have the very similar workflows, and we do like to keep an original copy of whatever was sent in, whether it's internal or external, and then changes are tracked all the way through if we need to go back and refer to those. Sorry,
You guys
Jennifer.
ready to move on? Sorry.
Sure.
No, you're good. You're good. I also want to make sure I leave a little bit of time for contest updates, but I think this is a great question that I would love to throw back at you guys. Talk to me about your own mindset. So what are some of the things that you keep in mind when other people are editing your work? And maybe to a large part, that's a big part of the conversation that maybe we all need to hear too. So any tips for that?
Well, I always grew up with a big critiquer in my mom, so I was used to it, from the time we did 4-H stories or speeches and FFA speeches, and I think almost going through that process can almost prepare a writer to be better even than going through some journalism pyramid style and all that, because as the year goes through and you're working on a story, each time you try to make that better and connect with your audience, and it's great training for story writing for a magazine. So I think we always want to look for critique and how things sound to somebody. How does somebody else interpret the words that I put on paper?
Yeah, I agree with Shauna and like the approach of I want this to be the best story it can be, and if that takes somebody else marking it up, that's what I want. Because
Yeah.
we want to put out the best thing possible. And I think it's also just the exercise of going through it over and over again, where my early work was edited by Lisa. She didn't use red pen, she used green pen, but it would be just covered in green. To where a lot of times now I'm sending my stories to Miranda on her team to look over, and it's still being marked up, which is good, and I'm learning. But I just, as I've gone through my career, just learning that they have our the magazine's best interest in mind, the audience's best interest in mind, and wants this to be the best story. And yeah, I get excited about the opportunity to improve as well. It's kind of what Shauna was saying from her perspective. And I do think it's important not to get sometimes too attached to things, you know, because somebody might read that and it didn't come across the same way as what you intended, or that didn't stand out, you know, to them. So just being open-minded, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's hard to remember too. Like sometimes there are things that are just in your head that
Yeah.
you've interviewed, or sometimes to take a huge number of interviews and distill it down, it's easy for that to be in your head, but maybe that didn't come through in the writing. And so I love that perspective too that somebody else can offer if by chance you miss something just because it's so
Mm-hmm.
ingrained in your thinking.
Yep, absolutely. You're very close to the story, you know the subject.
Mm-hmm.
You might
Yeah.
miss putting it down.
Every story can be made better.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
I
Well,
want
I
to add
know
one
we're,
thing.
go ahead.
I, on the way we used to do it at Angus with and I did it at Hereford for a while, where we had the folders and they went back and forth and you saw the edits. I mean, some days I wish it used to be that way, because you track changes, you accept them. Are you really learning? Where I used to get a folder back, I had to make the change. It was marked up, like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what made me a better editor or better writer, is actually having to make the changes, not just go through. And so, like, with my students in my class, I would mark it up and make them do it, because I really think there's something to be said about that, instead of tracking changes and let them just go accept all and
Yeah.
reset. Like, I don't know. I
Well,
think
what
there's something
that'll wind up doing,
so.
is that if somebody repeatedly sends me the same mistakes for a year, we might not use them, right? I mean, it
Right.
gets to a point where if they're making us do all the work of it, then there might be somebody else who does improve and does make the changes to fit our audience. That's faster and easier for us to get a story from start to go. And right now, I don't think anybody is doing less. I mean, even if we have a few pages less in a book, we're doing 30 stories online. Um, and there's for those who work with us and get better, we put more time in, and for those who don't, it'll be less.
A good point. Okay, I'm going to pause you and I'm going to give Macy a couple minutes, and Sean and Julie, there's some questions over in the chat. So why don't you guys peek at the questions, and Macy, you're up, and then we'll come back for anybody who can stay a little bit longer. I don't want to cut this short because I know this is I love all the questions coming in, but I want to give Macy a few minutes here.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you all, Shauna and Julie, for sharing. I was just typing my email address in the chat so that everybody could send me some judge recommendations, which we're going to talk about. And I was very self-conscious about the way I was spelling recommendations, considering we have editors in the room. So anyway, I am Macy Igo, formerly hers. My Zoom just hasn't gotten the update yet. But anyway, I'm a co-chair of the LPC Contest and Awards Committee with Shelby Deem of the Shorthorn Association. And with our committees this year, and with the fearless leadership of Stacy Fox, we've done a little changing, just kind of updating. I think it's been a while since the contest has had any big changes. So just kind of general contest information. The entries open March 10th. So now's the time. Early entries are due Friday, April 18th at just before midnight. So don't forget to do that. Those early entries are $30 for general categories or $50 for general excellence. Whereas after the 18th, there's a late deadline, May 2nd, and those go up to 60 and 80 respectively. So get those in now. There's also the skill excellence categories. Those are $100 now and $130 between April 18th and May 2nd. And then if you've already done your entries, you may have seen that credit card fees now apply, just like every other merchant. LPC is getting hit with that. So that is new this year. We also have some new category descriptions. Thanks to Heather Heater of Grant Company for writing those. That's a huge help to kind of differentiate between some of those categories that there may have been confusion with in the past. And also to kind of combat that issue, this year we are implementing a kind of a reassignment rule that if you enter something into an award category that the judges say that does not fit there, and so I'm not going to score it well, then we can move it into a category where you may score better because it's more appropriate. And then another change on the judging is that we are now requiring judges feedback, and that will be shared with participants. So that's been a thing in the past. It ended up being, I think, just too much for the judges, and so it got eliminated, but now it's being required again. So if you do the contest for feedback, please come back. And then finally, if you're in the design space, we reorganized some of the ad categories. There were several of them that just were not getting any entries. So those have been condensed and kind of redone. So you'll see that if you go to enter. And then last, but certainly not least, we are in desperate need of some judging recommendations. There are 70 plus categories, and I want to say at least 3 judges on each category. So if you know anyone in the design, PR, writing, photography, videography, whatever matches kind of with any of these categories, I would very, very, very much appreciate your recommendations. I'm putting my email in the chat. So yeah, any thoughts, any volunteers? If you yourself would volunteer, that would be much appreciated. But feel free to email me with those names, or if you have any questions.
Thanks, Macy. I appreciate it. Okay. All right, let's go back to a couple of those questions for anybody who can stay because I thought they were very good. So, any advice for helping writers keep subjective transitions out of their writing? That's for
Lisa,
Lisa.
I'd love to hear your
Yes.
ideas there.
That is so common in
Yes.
what I read in student writing. I've been editing all morning on stories, and it's better on the second story than it was on the first. So they've learned a little bit, but
And we're not supposed to interject our opinions, right? And
oh, but
subjective transitions do that.
right. Right. And so that's the challenge that I always have because they don't know what to do. They always write, and they also write in cliches a lot. And so, like I was listening to what you said earlier about writer's voice and, trying to let some of that be. But, when they're reporting a story, which is what they're doing, they're not writing columns necessarily. So
Right.
I'm constantly cleaning those things out of their writing. So if you have any tips for me on that, I would love it.
The biggest thing that I would say is conciseness, right? And if it's coming from us and our point of view, it takes away from the source and the educational value that we have in that story. And each word should have merit, and no, we don't go through and weigh everything up that way. But at the same time, when you look at that, if it has an ly, if you're starting a sentence with an ly word, you probably need to get rid of it. Don't say unfortunately.
Sure.
Don't say and get I guess that's one of the things that probably has popped up more in the last 5 to 7 years is a lot more of that commentary from the writer. And commentary is not the same thing as a writer's voice. A writer's voice to me is Troy Smith, might use a different word for cattleman. He'll come or a different word for a cow than what Becky Mills does down in Georgia. She might write about crackers and things like that. That somebody in Wyoming wouldn't, and that might have a place, and if it's explained to a person in Wyoming that makes everybody interested. But when you start to put your own transition with your feelings in it, you've gone overboard. You're
Very
not
good.
painting a picture, you're mixing the ink.
Do Do you ever have people who edit just to edit and may not be needed? And how do you deal with that? From Cindy.
Great question. I think really what comes to mind on that end of it for us is probably source edits and changes versus edit, I guess I haven't had a whole lot of experience with that, but when I think of some of the changes that our sources send back to us, just working through we're gonna allow you to, we'll change that quote or, but if you're wanting to rewrite the lead, probably we're gonna leave that to the writer and the editor to do that. And we just try to have an honest conversation with them about why maybe we think that's important. But we do try to make sure our sources are happy with the accuracy and things like that. But Shauna, do you have experience with that or anybody else? Because I think that's an interesting question.
No, I was just wondering if anybody's accused me of that, that I might be
That's a
the
great
one that
question too.
might over edit too. And um, I'd go back to looking at that as if somebody came back to me and really had a reason for why they wanted something to be the way they presented it versus how I edited it. Um, it's my job to be able to explain that and to explain why, and I would probably let them decide, because at the end, unless it's an accuracy, it's for me, I've got to be the gatekeeper to my audience, and I need to make sure that what goes into the magazine is accurate and according to our style. Um, but if it's, push come to shove and it doesn't make a difference at the end of the day, I think it's better, they think their way is better. That's part of the author's voice I might go with, but then maybe turn that into an LPC critique and let the judges see if they come back and say, well, maybe you should have taken that out of the sentence, be a little bit more concise, and there you go.
Yeah, I had the best editor that there are a lot of really amazing editors on this call, but the best editor that I ever worked with was actually, he was my boss at the time, and he had worked for the Des Moines Register prior to
Oh,
coming to Pork, and he was amazing. And he said that there's a lot of different ways to say the same thing, and it doesn't always have to be your way to say it the right way. And you guys have all, Julie, you mentioned source. We had what I would call a source, a veterinarian on staff who just edited everything, and is the best editor ever. And it just, that was always a frustration point of how you tread across that to make sure that you had accuracy, but that it was the subjectiveness
right.
of what he thought needed to be in there versus what we knew needed to be in there. So
He probably didn't get rid of passive voice, did he?
it was all in his voice. He's long since retired, so
Yeah.
it's okay. But okay,
Yeah.
thanks for your tips.
Well, I know we're like over on time, and so I like to try to wrap these things up as best I can to be about 45 minutes. But hey, we had a little extra guest on, and if people want to get excited about talking about editing, I'm all for it. And I know it's such a big
Yes.
part of what we do. It's really important to the kind of work we put out and to our integrity as agricultural journalists. And so I just want to say thank you guys so much for putting all that time into your thoughts, and your preparation really means a lot to us. And we will have a story that will come out that'll feature a few of these key points, as well as the link to the YouTube video that will be coming out. So be watching our LPC Actiongram for that story in the future, and be watching our social media for the video to share with any of your colleagues who weren't able to attend, or any veterinarians who need good reminders, Cindy. So with that, again, thank you guys so much. And
Please don't do
Thank
that.
you all.
I will. Oh, and I guess stay tuned. We'll put information out. We'll share that out on social about the next one coming up. We're excited about that. We're going to be digging into, I believe, if my memory serves me, to some analytics and bringing in somebody from our digital ops team to share some insights that I think will be really helpful. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care.